Welcome to the Island Times. I'm Tom Patton. Representative Janet Adkins was elected to represent the newly drawn 11th District in the Florida House of Representatives last November. The district includes the 3 beach communities. She's just completed her first legislative session as the Beaches Area Representative, and we're very happy to welcome her here to the Island Times. Representative Adkins, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely, glad to be here.
We all know it's been kind of a rancorous time in Washington. What has the tone been like in Tallahassee during the legislative session?
Well, you know, I think that both Republicans and Democrats both worked hard to work together to solve Florida's problems. I know as chair of the K-12 Education Committee, I met with the members of my committee from the minority party early on, back in December, to talk with them, find out what their priorities are, what was important to them, so that we could begin to build that relationship of trust. And I think we did a good job with that. You know, the only way that you can get things done in Tallahassee is to work together and to have relationships built on trust.
So you chaired the K-12 Education Committee. How did education fare in the session this year?
Well, I think clearly education was the big winner this year. We put in over an extra $1 billion from what we had allocated the prior year. We included, of that, $480 million that was sent to the local school boards for them to set aside for teacher raises. So for those effective and highly effective teachers, they can receive salary increases of $2,500 to $3,500. And so that was a big deal. We also, when you look at the per student funding, it was roughly on average about $400 per student increase over last year. So education was a big, big winner this year.
So what kind of changes can parents and students expect to see in their classrooms as a result of some of those changes?
Well, you know, one of the changes that we did dealt with instructional materials, giving local school boards more flexibility, more local control in the textbooks that they select. That might not be readily apparent to the students and to the parents, but clearly to those local school boards having that greater control, greater flexibility. I hear that all the time, more local control. So I was pleased with that legislation that we passed. We also, out of the K-12 committee, came the multiple pathways bill. Senate Bill 1076 was the final number that passed, and that looks at creating multiple designations for our high school students to graduate. We've heard a lot of concern about those students who may not want to go to college, but they need to learn a life skill. And clearly industry certification is very important these days, and so what we've done is we've created 2 different designations. One for a scholar designation. Those students would be ready to go into the university system. The other is the merit designation. Those students, if they chose, would be ready to go straight into college, but would also provide an opportunity for them to receive an industry certification. The purpose of this legislation is to connect the skills of our students with the needs of our employers, and I'm very proud of the work that we've done on that bill.
What was the disconnect, do you think? What was it that caused the need for that legislation?
Well, you know, I think that in prior years we had looked at the education system and we had kind of a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think what we've learned is that that is not going to lead to success, either for our students or for our businesses. So again, trying to connect the skills of those students with the needs of the employers and making sure that every student has a pathway that will lead them to success.
Let's change topics because one of the other major issues that we heard a lot about was the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare Act. Where do we stand on that?
Well, we are pretty much in the same position as we were several months ago, even before session. We did not take action on an insurance exchange. We have opted to let the federal government pursue that. There were just too many unknowns and just no real firm estimate as to what the dollar figure would be, what the cost would be to Florida's taxpayers. And so we opted to let the feds do that, at least for now. On the Medicaid expansion, the House presented and adopted a plan. The Senate accepted another plan, and so there really just wasn't agreement between the 2 chambers. So that's a discussion I'm sure we'll continue to have in the future.
Which approach do you favor?
Well, I prefer the approach that the House selected. That's more of a patient-centered insurance approach as opposed to a government-centered insurance approach. When you look at health care, I really believe that it's most important that Floridians have the opportunity to choose what's best for them. I'm a big believer in having that choice. And so the choice that the bill that the House passed would have allowed those Floridians to have that choice to make their own decision, not simply put them on Medicaid. And so that's the position that I favor.
Are there any estimates to the costs to Floridians as we move down this road, what it might cost in out-of-pocket expenses for somebody who might be uninsured?
Well, that's the big question mark. When you look at the cost of health care, you can look at Medicaid and what Florida's taxpayers have sheltered, the burden. When you look at 1999, Medicaid consumed 15% of Florida's budget. In 2011, that number had grown to 29%. When you look at Florida's budget today, I think the numbers are about 42% of Florida's $74 billion budget goes to fund health care in some fashion, and the majority of that is Medicaid. So when you look at Medicaid expansion, then you know that those numbers are simply going to grow exponentially. Now, right now under the Affordable Care Act, the plan is that the federal government will pay for 100 and then 90%. But what we know is that with a $16 trillion federal deficit, those numbers are likely to change. When you look at the current Medicaid model, Florida's taxpayers pay roughly 50% and the federal government contributes roughly 50%. So eventually, over time, I believe we're going to move more towards those numbers. So this is a big long-term commitment that, quite frankly, I think we need to be very deliberate about how we make those choices.
With the basic implementation of Obamacare supposedly coming next year, do you anticipate a special session to go back and work on that this year, or is it going to wait until next March?
I've heard arguments on both sides, and it's really anybody's guess. But I really don't expect to go back in special session. But that's just my own personal opinion.
Our local mayors are all dealing with pension issues, and pension reform is something that almost every community in the country is dealing with. Where do we stand on pension reform in the state of Florida?
Well, to me, that was one of the big disappointments of this session. The House, again, had passed a pension reform bill that would have changed pension reform. Instead of having a defined benefit, it would have been a defined contribution, much like many of our small businesses and large businesses, for that matter, have today. You have very few pensions with defined benefits anymore. The Senate unfortunately rejected that plan, so that's perhaps something that we'll look at again next session. Of course, last year we were successful in getting the employee contribution, so now each state employee contributes 3% towards their own pension costs.
Moving on to a happier topic, you and Senator Bean were able to work together and secure $1 million for the ferry for the infrastructure piece of it. It doesn't go into operating, which a lot of us who have been watching that issue very closely are concerned about. But where does that leave the ferry service long term?
Well, I think this is going to be an ongoing battle, quite frankly. It was interesting because we've been working on this issue since January of 2012, when the Jacksport first announced that they were no longer going to continue the operation. And quite frankly, I was very disappointed a year ago when the Florida Department of Transportation indicated that they would not support financially the ferry. And so, we've been working on this issue for about 16, 18 months now. And it was interesting because, we were successful in getting a line item amount of $1 million on the House side. Senator Bean was able to get $500,000. His was for infrastructure. Mine was silent. The $1 million was silent. It wasn't for operating or infrastructure. It was just flexible, And so it was interesting. As soon as both chambers had indicated that this was a priority, then the Florida Department of Transportation said, okay, well, let's talk and and so we were able to secure the funding. But I think this is going to be an ongoing issue that we'll have to look at.
One of the other things that I didn't realize was an issue until I got a notice from you about it was the fuel tax for the commercial fishermen. How does that help the fishing industry in this area?
What happened is that last summer we had several shrimpers in the Fernandina area come to me to say, we're getting these notices from the Florida Department of Revenue saying we owe back sales tax, and they're telling us to remit sales tax for the last 3 years and we're exempt from it. We should be exempt. And so we went round and round with the department and studied the statute, and come to find out there was a loophole there. It was there, the exemption applied for agriculture, but not aquaculture. And so they had thought that they were exempt not only from the motor vehicle fuel tax, but also from the sales tax. And so we decided then that we would file this legislation. We then amended it to take care of commercial fishermen. Now, a lot of commercial fishermen are already exempt. If you fish in federal waters, then you don't have to pay the sales tax for what you're using in federal waters. But for our small shrimpers and our small commercial fishermen who are fishing in state waters, closer to shore, they were the ones that were being really financially burdened. And so I was thrilled that we were able to get that legislation passed through not only the House, but the Senate. The governor signed it into law. So this will be a tremendous help, and it will help keep food prices low. There's a history as to why Florida does not tax agriculture, and that's because we want to try to keep food prices low. And shrimping and commercial fishing, that's all part of food production. So it just made sense that we would not charge sales tax for their dyed diesel fuel.
Let's talk for a minute about jobs, because we haven't talked about that. The employment numbers for the state of Florida have been improving. Do you feel like that the state is on the right track for job creation, and what is being done in Tallahassee to move those efforts forward?
Clearly, I think the state is moving in the right direction. Now, do we have more work to do? Absolutely, we do, and that's why I'm working to help small businesses, as they deal with the government bureaucracy and government regulations. But when you look at the unemployment rate, I think we're now down to about 7.2%. It wasn't that long ago we were in double digits, so clearly we're in the right direction. CEO Magazine has ranked Florida number 2 as best in the nation for doing business. Texas still remains number 1. So we need to, take on Texas and Governor Rick Perry. But, things are moving in the right direction. What I think we need to do is we need to add more reliability and stability to businesses. They need to kind of know what's coming down. We need to reduce the uncertainty, if you will. When we do that, then I think you're going to naturally see those investors, those people with capital, the ones who actually create jobs. I think you'll see them being more willing to use that capital to build new businesses, to take risks, and to create jobs. That's what I think we need to do.
So you've just finished your first legislative session representing the Beaches area. But let's look down the road a year. What are the big issues that you're anticipating that you'll be looking at in the 2014 session?
Well, good question. You're right. We just finished, and already we're beginning to think about what legislation we'll file next year. I know that I will continue to work on legislation to help small businesses. I had worked really hard on House Bill 1225 this last year, and we were able to get it successfully passed through all of the committees of reference, but it only passed one committee in the Senate. So we still have some more work to do. But that bill would have really kind of leveled the playing field for small businesses with state government. What happens a lot of time is these, state bureaucratic agencies, they'll come in and they'll survey your business, they'll audit you, they'll come in and they'll regulate you. And sometimes they cross the line. Sometimes, maybe they're having a bad day. Sometimes they engage in, and they just make bad decisions, things that would hurt your business. And then when you say, no, I think you're wrong, Mr. State Employee, and they say, no, what are you going to do to us? And then they'll say, well, it's easier for you just to pay the fine than to fight. And most of the time, they're right. But, when that has the impact of hurting your business, then right is right. And it's never the wrong time to fight for what's right. And so what this bill would do is to say, if you take on state government and you're right and you win, then that state agency is going to pay for your attorney fees. Because what's happened is it's gotten so expensive to hire an attorney to protect your interest and to protect your rights. The easier thing is simply to settle and just move on, but then that's got long-term costs. So this, I think, will really be good for those small businesses. It will kind of allow those businesses to kind of take back their state government. So I'm excited about that legislation. I think we'll be successful in getting that passed next year. Out of the K-12 Education Committee, I think you'll see us looking at middle school reform. So if any of your viewers have any ideas as to how they think they can improve our middle school grades. I'd love to hear from them. They can send me an email at janet.adkins@myfloridahouse.gov, or they can send it to the easier address, that's janet@janetadkins.com. And likewise, we send out newsletters at the end of, weekly while we're in session. So if any of your viewers would like to receive those updates, we'd love to add them to our email list.
Will you be continuing to maintain your office here in Jacksonville Beach through the off session, and how can people get in touch with you there?
Absolutely. We have office hours Monday through Wednesday from 10 to 3, and so we'll continue to keep that office open and look forward to serving the people here in Jacksonville Beach, Atlantic, and Neptune Beach.
Well, Janet Adkins, thank you very much for taking some time to talk with us on the Island Times.
It's my pleasure.